Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Hey Extrology listeners, welcome to today's episode. A little break from the norm, in so much as a reflective opportunity to look back on some of the incredible guests that we enjoyed on the Extrology podcast through the course of 2023, before we move on to a really exciting and equally incredible array of guests that we have for you through the course of 2024. But without further ado, let's get into it. And first up, we have episode 72 with the wonderfully inspirational, utterly brilliant Paula Reid. Second time that Paula had featured as a guest on Extrology. Paula brings with her an incredible array of achievements. I think it's fair to say that playing small is not something that Paula does, nor in her view, and indeed in many of you, does it serve the world well. She's someone that I would describe as, she ventures where most seldom dare. She's, amongst other things, a list of incredible achievements, but she cycled across the entirety of 16 countries and most recently added a war-stricken Ukraine to that list in an adventure which exposed the remarkable resilient nature of its people. And the kind of mindset to take that nub of an idea and turn it into such a bold pursuit is fascinating. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, the wonderfully talented, awesome Paula Reid. I'm going to ask you kind of almost 3 or 4 questions in one, never a good premise again, but nonetheless. So why do it? Why Ukraine? How did you hit upon that kind of, that idea, that thought? How did it all come about?
Thanks for that clear, concise question.
It's my job
You're
as the host.
You're such an expert, aren't
absolutely.
So, I think there's layers to the why question, as in there's levels of answer. You know, there's the deep why, and then there's a bit of superficial why, and everything in between. So, some whys, some answers to that why. One is, ever since the war kicked off, which was February, March last year, so it's been a year and a half now. I remember watching the TV footage and being, first of all, obviously completely disheartened and shocked by the situation, but then really impressed by the people. So when I watched the Ukrainians on their TV interviews and all that, they're obviously going through trauma, but their attitudes were incredible. I just felt massive respect and admiration and inspiration watching their attitudes during this horrendous conflict. So that immediately made me feel like, good on you, I want to help them. They're being brilliant, but wow, and just want to be on their side. Not the side of war, but just, you know, the solidarity thing. And I wanted to physically be there, because it's all well and good going, poor you or poor them, or even throwing some money at the problem, but we're still in our safe, comfortable, fearless homes, right? So I wanted to have boots on the ground, to be there, to make eye contact, which is massive, I think, to give them a physical hug, to show that I am with them physically, and do whatever I could to help. So that's what kicked it off, this cycle. So how that came about was that I had already cycled 16 countries. So I've got a little game that I play, and it's called 50 Good Turns. And the idea is to cycle across 50 countries and do one good turn in each country whilst raising money for UNICEF. So I was doing that anyway. And I had already cycled across 16 countries. So I kind of know what it's like to cycle across a country, and I love it. Then also this year, I was volunteering for a charity in Ukraine. So I'd already been out there twice, spent about 3 weeks each time, and got a good feel for Ukraine. I assumed I would never cycle across Ukraine, but then coming back from them, sitting at home, just reflecting, processing my life and, you know, what I do with it. And of course, those two thoughts came together. the cycling and the Ukraine. So I was like, well, why not cycle across Ukraine? I'd been out there. I had assumed the state of the roads would be too horrendous and difficult, but actually there obviously is some damage and some broken bridges and potholes and destroyed roads, but the bulk of the country has got brilliant roads, or they're repairing them all the time, which is great to see. So I knew it was cyclable. My heart was with the Ukrainians and wanting to do whatever I could to help them. And then there was that avoiding comfort and embracing fear thing, which makes me go and do these crazy things. So it all came together, really. And as soon as I had the thought, it then had to happen. And that's when my stomach started to clench. And I was like, oh, here we go.
You can feel that manifest physically. Yeah. You know, this is something I'm going to do. Yeah. You get that little butterfly, that feeling that says, I'm going to go do it.
And it's like, oh no, Paula, why did you have that thought? Because now it's got to happen. Yeah, so why I'm passionate about helping them. I'm passionate about the Ukrainian situation. I think they're incredible people. I think also playing small does not serve the world. So some of us, not just me, I think need to role model the way and get out there and do amazing stuff that other people can then get strength or inspiration from. So there was so many layers to the achievement of that cycle. I enjoyed it. All the Ukrainians that saw me or chatted to me felt probably, a little bit sense of somebody's with us or thinking about us. We raised a load of money for charity. But also everyone I speak to since, including this podcast, I'm hoping will just have a little bit of hope, strength or inspiration from us doing these things.
Absolutely. One of the many things that struck me about this episode with Paula was the really vivid and utterly sobering experience of crossing a war zone and the inevitable people that she meets along the way, their stories, their resilience, their spirit, huge inspiration from which, in the face of clearly the most testing of circumstances, you realise just the astounding nature of the human spirit in every sense. And it's something that Paula captures really vividly through the course of her episode. Let's take this opportunity to hear in Paula's own words her experiences, those people that she'd met on the course of her journey, the inspiration that she gained and the insight that she gained, and the emotional toll those encounters took on her while she was on this incredible journey through Ukraine.
There's the emotional toil of experiencing all that and the cycle and the sleeping rough sort of thing, because we were sleeping in the van. So it's tiring, physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually, And there was one place called Reeves, which had also been bombed and occupied. And we accidentally came across a birthday party of 10, 23-year-old women. And they were all beautifully dressed. They, they were drinking champagne in a restaurant, beautiful dressed, the nails, the hair. Lovely, lovely women. But then showing us photos and videos on their phones of their destroyed houses, their destroyed businesses, the fire, the ruins. The church nearby was just covered in shrapnel. The local bus station was just broken glass. And they were talking about their friends that had been murdered and raped. That's the dark stuff that you come across quite rightly. And you listen and you empathise and you're there for them. And the fact they are seen and heard is quite important. And on this trip, I was capturing some films of local stories. And I had two from that place. Just to honour and respect and listen and capture these stories, because I'm keen to try and support the mental health, the psychological well-being going forward. Madam Zelensky has got a campaign of everyday mental health. So I'm trying to capture stories of the horrendous trauma that they're going through, but also the everyday things they're doing to just cope or survive. So I did that as well in Reeves. So you've got deep, traumatic, dark, heavy, sad, emotional moments like that, as well as the physical cycling. And then towards the end, that was the other challenging bit, because you've got, we're slightly laughing because we were in Chernobyl and near Belarus, and in a war zone. So it's like, how dangerous can this get? If we get bitten by a mosquito, are we going to turn like into radioactive creatures? So it was slightly surreal. But the challenging bit was then, where do we stop? When do we stop? How close to Chernobyl and Belarus and the border can we get in a military occupied zone? And so, again, we lent on local contacts to advise us and to respect their decisions as to when and where we stopped up there. And that's all I can probably say about that bit.
No, understandable. One of the things that strikes me, frankly, amazes me, and all credit to you, and I know that's not why you're doing this, but that is I'm curious as to the mental strategies. I recall from when we spoke before, the mental strategies you might employ with some of the challenges that you've undertaken previously to get through those, those darker moments, because inevitably when you're physically exerting yourself, that also takes an emotional toll. You've learned techniques and ways to get you through some of those darker moments through those types of trips. But when we talk about darker moments here, the thing that strikes me is that you've got the physical toil that you're enduring, the emotional toil you're naturally enduring because of the physical impact of what you're, but there's layer upon layer of suffering of others that I'd imagine is incredibly hard to. That's adding a layer of emotional turmoil to you through the trip that ordinarily you wouldn't when you're going to the South Pole, for example. It's a very different experience. How do you cope with that?
You're right. I almost feel like, I think privilege is the wrong word. It's a bit naff, but I know, I should feel these things.
I think it's very natural to know
through a war zone and not feel and not emote,
absolutely,
or feel compassion or sympathy or sadness or cry. It's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is accepting and almost appreciating or not enjoying, but kind of grateful. That's probably the right word, right? Grateful to be there, to be able to listen or meet or smile or hug with these people. I think, gratitude is probably the right word. To be lucky enough to be there, to be present again and soak up the nowness of that relationship. I remember speaking, hold on, where was she? That's right, that was Borodianka as well. Twice now I've been to Borodianka, which, as I said, has been occupied and fairly destroyed. And twice separate old ladies, so they call them babushkas over there. They're amazing women with such toughness. In fact, I get a bit of strength from them, actually. Twice I've been, I think because I'm being quite present and, with it, I've been talked at in Ukrainian by these babushkas. I don't really do Ukrainian language at all. And you're just watching their facial expressions and you're watching the emotions pass through as they talk to you. I've no idea what they're saying, but they are being heard. They're being seen and heard. So I've had moments like that again, I'm grateful for. So to have the privilege of having these amazing older ladies who have been through hell and back several times, I think, at that age, to talk with me, even though I don't understand a word they're saying, it kind of strengthens and inspires me despite the emotional toil it's taking. So it's the honour and privilege and pleasure of having those conversations and being there that helps. Accepting that you're going to experience some difficult things while you're out there. And then I guess the energy of the mission or the challenge keeps you going. So I come back knackered, but there's an adrenaline or a chemical flow that's going on, cycling, living on the edge, camping each night, getting up at 6, speaking to people, crazy stuff going on, like attending that birthday party or cycling past a tank that's pointing at you. That kind of keeps a bit of adrenaline and chemicals flowing in your system too. So I think I wouldn't be able to sustain it for that long, but for the sake of the few weeks that I was out there, that kept me going as well.
One of the most impactful episodes of the Extrology podcast through the course of 2023 came in the form of episode 57, with the force of human nature, this wonderful bundle of positive energy that is Mark Reeves, founder of Shaka Surf. And Mark gave a really moving and I almost want to say gripping story as to just how overcoming trauma in the way that he has, it's fair to say that his journey through life begins with a horrifying event, but overall is far from a sad tale. It's a story brimming with unrelenting positivity and huge inspiration for us all. And I think what we can take from Mark is that after decades in an unfulfilling role, he has now ultimately found his true calling in what is best described as he shaped for himself an incredible lifestyle, literally chasing surf around the world, working incredibly hard, but also enjoying himself. He talked, and I think a phrase that really struck me through Mark's episode, it really resonated. He talks about being rich in life, and I think that is a phrase that so many of us could really truly benefit from. And seeking understanding of what that phrase truly means can be impactful for all of us. So I think it's fair to say the depth of Mark's experience is frankly unparalleled and can only really be told in his own words. So without further ado, I introduce you to the wonderful Mark Reeves.
Something happened in 1977 which just changed my life. I was playing on my skateboard. Basically, we lived trying to get the setting. We're in a London street in Clapham, rows of houses. We had a little corner shop next door to us, across the road. I can picture it now. And I was on my skateboard with a guy called Stephen Day, I think his name. Never seen him since I've moved. But
how old were you at this point?
1977 this was, so I was 8. It was late 77. So yeah, we were walking, playing on the skateboard that I made out of some roller skate wheels and a plank of wood. Screwed them on. So I'm playing outside, completely happy, talkative, mad about football, cricket, played that every day, went down Clapham Common, played every day with mates, no phones. You know, it was those days when you go out and in the morning on a Saturday, all your mates come around, get down to Clapham Common, play football all day, get filthy dirty, come home when it's dark and have your dinner, you know, or on Sunday, because I was obviously watching Wimbledon if they're at home. But yeah, that was my life, brilliant. And yeah, so I was playing on my skateboard that I made outside, right outside the door of this shop, and suddenly this blue Bedford van pulled up. You know, there's old school 70s Bedford vans, and a load of guys jumped out the back, out the passenger door, and I've looked up, and they've all got these stockings over their heads, like, you know, distorted faces. I still see it now. Their noses all squashed up against their faces, you know, big, like big guys. Knives, axes, guns apparently, but I didn't see them. But yeah, so that they've jumped out, get out of the way, pushed me out of the way. I thought, whoa, you know, I'm tiny, I'm like 8 years old. And I was a bit of a like, what are you doing? Like that, I was like, whoa, it just took me by. So I thought, what do I do? Right, I need to help. So I ran across the road, knocked on the door, no one. No. So I shouted through the letterbox, opened the letterbox. I always remember my dad eating spaghetti. Oh, and he had it dangling down his face trying to get it in. Mum, Dad, somebody's robbing the shop. So he's got up. You know, my dad's not a violent man or anything like that. You know, he's the most chilled bloke, you know, you could ever meet. And my mum's quite aggy, you know, she wouldn't take no shit. And so they both come running out. They've run across the road. I've run with them. My sister's at school, so, you know, she was coming at, or she was at some thing after school. So she didn't see it. And so I run in the shop. My dad said, get out. Like that. So my dad's jumped on this guy from behind, and I'm there. The door's open. My mum's gone in there. They've thrown my mum underneath the drink fish. You always remember, because you remember the All White's lemonade?
Yes.
Those bottles, yeah. And always remember them. They got and they slammed that over her and trapped her underneath. And she's seen this massive knife, like this like machete type of knife. And I've watched her and she's kicked it underneath the freezer. Like, because she's kicked it, so that's gone. So I'm watching all that. My dad's pretty much beating this guy up, basically. I've never seen my dad do it. I was like, blimey. And then they've obviously realised they're in trouble. So the drivers come out, push me out of the way again. Got this knife, probably about 8-10 inches, right in front of me, just gone straight in my dad's neck. Down there. Not across, it's gone down. And
So down into it, down through his...
It's gone down
through his spine.
It's punched his lung.
Goodness me.
He's got this knife sticking out of him, blood everywhere, and my mum's screaming, and my dad's, what's going on? I'm going to pass out. I'm going to pass out. And I didn't know what pass out meant, because does that mean die? No, like that. And obviously this guy's sped off.
So they'd gone. These guys had,
they've done
plunged the knife.
After they've done, they've known they're in
trouble.
They're in trouble. So they've got in the van. They sped off, and I've run after them down the road. Don't know why. I always remember running down those white lines in the middle of the road. I'm going, yeah, you stay, my dad. I was running down there, and then I thought, what are you doing? You're not going to catch them. Obviously, they come back, and all I remember is my dad sat on a chair in the middle of the road with people all around him, and everyone's called an ambulance. The ambulance didn't arrive. And yeah, pretty much that was it. It was like shock, and then the shock sets in. They broke my mum's hand as well. Like the Vinnie Jones episode in that film.
In Lock, Stock.
Yeah, where they're slamming his hand in the door.
Yeah.
They were doing that in the shop door with her hand. I always remember it, seeing her, and she was screaming. And I always remember that. Like, obviously, she broke her hand. Yeah, and that was that day in 1977.
Did someone call the police?
No one turned up for ages. I always remember no one turned up for ages. So in the end, we had to get Dad in a taxi. So that he's led out in a taxi, and he's gone to hospital in a taxi because the emergency services took a little too long to arrive.
Jeez, I mean, that's... Even just hearing you describe it, it sounds horrific.
It's vivid. I still remember everything.
Clearly, it's very vivid for you.
The hard thing, I've never really spoke about it.
No, I know.
The reason being, obviously, this was quite a big crime. These guys were London protection gangs and nasty people.
So to your point, it was that I think you made mention there were guns or there was the suggestion that guns had been involved.
I didn't see
it's an armed robbery.
Obviously,
it's an armed robbery, right? Whether it's with knives or gun, whatever, it's an armed robbery. Yeah. So these guys are committing armed robbery. Your dad, and your mum, what an incredibly brave couple of people, selfless, brave people.
God, yeah. I think that's where I get my...
I think a lot of people would have gone, crikey, that's a scary... I'm staying out of that. I'm not getting involved. I mean, huge... If credit is even the right word, I'm not sure that's anywhere near enough what I want to say, but incredibly brave. But then the aftermath of that, you then got your dad.
This was the worst bit. Obviously, my dad was in hospital for 3 months.
Right. That was going to be my next question. So, first and foremost, how was your dad? How was your mum physically before we go on to the clearly?
Yeah, my mum was fine physically. They fixed her hand, but she had a nervous breakdown after that. And because my dad was in hospital for so long, what I remember is my mum in bed every night crying, basically, me and my sister. So we're in the same bed. I think we had some people nicking our car and trying to break in.
Trying to intimidate you as a...
Basically, my mum was the chief witness, and, it was a pretty big thing because these guys were nasty. I did hear stories of them with other people breaking in people's houses and gouging their eyes out because they haven't paid their protection money and stuff like that. That's what I've heard. I don't know whether that's true, but that's what I've heard over the years. Which
I guess, even as an adult, it's horrific. But as a child, you must look. The thing that strikes me is you lose some innocence. You lose a lot of innocence, right? You're growing up overnight. You're being thrown into a world that you never expect to find yourself in.
To be honest, it's the best thing that ever happened to me.
It's fair to say that Mark's unrelenting positivity, and it's a genuine, authentic positivity and no stress approach to life, I think has been shaped by the harrowing experiences that he'd undergone as a child, and I think has enabled him to arrive at a place where it's kind of like the only way is up. Let's just enjoy this for what it is. Let's be on the ride, let's be on the journey and make the most of it. And he's a real inspiration, an example to us all.
I think stress kills you. And what good is like negative? What good is stress? Like, you know, obviously, like I say to my daughter Yaz, if she gets anxious about something or she's stressed about something, and it's something trivial that she's going to forget. I said, "You can remember this next week." She goes, "What? Are you going to remember this next week?" Like, no. Right? I said, "Is anyone dying?" No. I said, "Don't worry about it." You know, whether it works, it works for me. But obviously, my mind's wired a little bit differently than most people. But, you know, stress kills you.
So we'd another Extrology returner in 2023 in the form of Sue Anstiss, MBE. We'd spoken first with Sue back in November 2020, and in the intervening 3 years, she has become director and producer of a hugely powerful Netflix documentary. And frankly, that was just scratching the surface. Much has changed in 3 years for Sue as the founder of Fearless Women. And to have her return to the Extrology podcast was a real privilege. It was a chance to observe not only the bountiful progress that women's sport has enjoyed, and indeed what is yet to come, also to reflect on the long way that women's sport still has to go to enjoy many of the privileges and opportunities that men's sport is afforded. But I think what was really insightful from Sue was not only to understand her passion for raising the profile of women's sport, but also to understand what it takes to get a Netflix documentary produced. It's fair to say it's no mean feat. It's certainly not a straight line. There are lots of challenges along the way, but Sue really kindly came back and shared with us her journey. And for those of you that haven't yet seen the documentary, then I'd certainly recommend checking it out on Netflix. It's a brilliant show. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Sue Anstiss. You know, what's the process from a practical perspective of going, right, day one, we're now making a Netflix documentary. What's for many of us, many listeners, certainly me, I've never been through that process. What does it look like? What does day one making a Netflix documentary actually entail?
And I guess the thing is, we weren't making a Netflix documentary to start with. That is an interesting point to make. So it wasn't. So when we first had the idea, we create like a treatment, like a proposal, take that out to all the broadcasters and say, this is what we're looking at. This is the storyline. A little bit of I think we had a sizzle reel then. So later on, we had a bit of a few bits of content from the shoots we'd done. But that early stage, we've just got pictures of who's going to be in it, a plan of what it might look like, the storyline, and why we're the people to make this with our expertise in different areas. And we took that out and no one wanted it. So that's the truth of it, is we took it out to I won't list the broadcasters, but every broadcaster, streamer, platform, terrestrial, international we could think of, and nobody wanted it. And we decided, well, we'll go ahead and make it anyway, because actually we were really committed to it. We felt it was if you look across at the different kind of platforms and you look at their tiles of all the different sports documentaries, there's very little on women's sport. So we felt we wanted to redress that balance. There was a story to be told there. We knew the book had done really well. We knew there was an interest. It's a growing area. So we thought we'll make it anyway and then go back to them afterwards and see. So you kind of either sell it that it's commissioned by one of those platforms and they pay you to go and make it, or you just make it yourself. And when you take it back, they then acquire it. So that's what we did. We just made it ourselves in the hope that somebody would take it when it was done. And if that hadn't happened, it probably would have just gone onto YouTube, onto our channel. It would still have existed as a fabulous piece of content. So when it was then made, we then went back out to all those same people, and a few were interested then. And some said it was beautiful, and it was, all those things. It's all very lovely when they then saw it. And Netflix wanted it, and it was Netflix that we'd always wanted from the start. So Jack and Ben have made stuff. They've been on Amazon Prime and BBC, which is and they're fantastic, all fantastic channels with different audiences. And I think at one point I was really excited about the BBC because I thought that, that's what I've grown up with and that's what I love. But actually Netflix was where we, even from the beginning of deciding which cameras we were using and the shots we were doing and the way in which it was made for Netflix, even though we didn't know where it was going to go. So the decisions we made about how we filmed and the captions that we used and the way in which we shot, it was almost made as if it was being made for Netflix. So when Netflix said they wanted to take it, acquire it. Obviously, it was a pretty amazing day for us. So it's just getting it to a place that it wouldn't otherwise have got to had it been on even ITV or BBC or Channel 4 would have been amazing. But I think the brand of Netflix and the association of Netflix, and because they've done so much in the area, I spend most of my evenings watching sports documentaries on Netflix. So we just knew we would reach a much different audience and a younger, that younger audience too.
And absolutely, I wouldn't accept your premise around not naming names, and I understand that entirely. Did you get any feedback as to those that didn't want it, why? And two questions in one, I think, never a good premise, but I'm going to do it anyway. There's partly why they didn't want it. Part of me leads me to think, what does that tell us about the subject matter? Is that a lazy assumption I'm making there?
No, absolutely. And I have to be careful what I say, because we are making more content and talking to those broadcasters right now. So they're all wonderful and they've all got a great place, and I'd love to work with them all. So I guess one of the messages that we did here, I think we weren't helped by the fact that the Euros had just happened and there were lots of people pitching lots of women's football content at that time. So there isn't much women's sport content out there, but it was kind of a busy time and there seemed to be a lot that was coming. And the World Cup was coming the next year too. So we were kind of in that window between Euros and World Cup. So there was quite a lot of people punting stuff around in the area of women's football and the Lionesses. But also what we did hear a bit, and we have talked about this in the past, is there's almost that thing of content needs to be led by names. You want a well-known household name, celebrity to lead the piece, and then you hook the story around that well-known person. And the problem for women's sport is where they're not that well-known as much as the men's, because they haven't had this coverage. So it's like the cyclical thing of until you can give them the coverage, and then they're seen in households and they are recognised and they're well known, but you're not taking these documentaries that may feature less well known women doesn't help that to change in the future either too. So it's almost a bit of actually, if you go with that rule, you'll only ever feature men from sports that have been around for 150 years that are well established and well known, or a few Olympians, tennis players, etc., from the female side. So that's almost like a difficult argument. And I do know, it's true that men don't read books by women as much as women read books by men and women. And they don't watch content. Men don't watch don't like female comedy. So it's not just me saying that anecdotally. Within society, men don't consume content that is created by women in the way that women consume created by men and women. So I think you're almost on a bit of from a broadcaster perspective, it's like, will this have as much success as a documentary made by a man about men's sport for men? That the audience then is men and women, so I do think you suffer a little bit with that. But I guess that isn't a reason not to do it, because we're trying to change those perceptions. And the feedback that I've had from the men that have watched it is it's amazing, and it's opened their eyes to things, and it's changed their minds on things, and it's great, amazing content and fabulous sport. But I'm not sure how many men would come down and, I think men are watching it with wives, daughters, sisters, or because they're in sport, or because they're a bit more progressive and they are interested in it. But actually, I'm not sure whether a guy sat down and looking at Sunderland Till I Die, Wrexham, whatever, whether he would choose Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport as something to draw him in. So it's interesting. But that, as I say, that's not a reason not to make it, in my opinion, because we need to drive that change and to put good content out there.
There were many takeaways from Sue's episode, not least where she explains her view as to just what it is that needs to be done for women's sport to grow and enjoy the extent of coverage, and indeed to create the same kind of opportunity that many a men's game has enjoyed for many years. Over to Sue to explain what needs to be done for women's sport to continue on this path and journey of growth. In terms of immediate next steps needed to achieve true equality for women and girls in sports, what do you think they might be?
I think for me, a lot of it is around leadership and governance, and who is not in control even, but around the table that's making those decisions. And that's why I think the Women's Sport Collective excites me so much, is if we can get more women and girls seeing sport's an amazing place to work, so coming into sport and then feeling they can progress through, and at the same time at the top end of better governance and quotas and getting women in those places too. So I do think that is the bit that needs to shift to have the biggest change. That if we had some of those things in place, we wouldn't have the issues that we're now looking at in Spain, in football, in rugby, and whatever it is, in cricket. So, and not just that women, so it's women and broad-minded men, but people with a different, I think it's just about putting women on boards, but definitely looking at that system. I think that would make a big difference. And I think without doubt, it's a funding and investment, whether you like the capitalist society or not, it is about funding and investment. And we are seeing that now, because we're seeing the data that exists to reassure sponsors if they need a reassuring that it's a fabulous place to invest and they'll get a great return, and they'll get more than they'll get in some cases from men's sport. So I think that more sports doing that, and then the broadcasters also taking a good hard look at themselves, and print media too, and saying, actually, are we equal and fair in what we're showing? So I guess those three areas I think are where we need to see a big shift. I've got many others, but those are probably the three I think will have the biggest impact.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning into today's Extrology podcast. Some great clips there from just a short selection of some of the wonderful guests we had through the course of 2023, with more to come. Next week, we'll reflect back similarly on some of the other guests and the messages of inspiration and the great stories behind the story that they have shared with us through the course of last year. Before, as I mentioned earlier, we get on to an incredible array of guests for 2024. So thank you for your time, thank you for your ears, thank you for your support, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again next week. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.